So I was looking at a Forbes.com article. Video games can be a gateway to problem gambling, the FTC was warned. And so if you remember last week, we touched on this a little bit, or maybe it's 2 weeks ago, that the FTC had this forum where they were looking specifically at loot boxes. And so Forbes has just released this article about how the FTC was advised about how the loot boxes can be a problem for people who have struggled with gambling addiction. And, this is just, it's kind of obvious stuff. And we've talked about this on the show that loot boxes are a form of gambling. You can spend real world money for the chance of something that you might want. And so they touched on how this is a problem for younger players in particular, because it may condition them and be their first taste of gambling, and it could be a problem later on. But this article focused on people who have gotten over their gambling addiction, and this can be like a stumbling block that knocks them back into it. And so there are a lot of the same mechanics. You've got the random chance for the prizes, sure, but also the flashing lights and sounds. It's all very reminiscent of a casino. And when I read that, I thought I've never actually been in a casino, but I've seen them on TV. And I thought about the noises and the way the loot boxes go through opening. I was like, yeah, they do capitalize on a lot. Like, they build excitement in the same way that the machines used for gambling build excitement. So again, I just wanted to reference a quote from Stephen Mansfield at his podcast. He was talking about the Second Amendment in particular. He's pro Second Amendment, but in a podcast about that issue, he said, if you don't police yourself, someone else will do it for you. And that stuck with me. And we've said for months now that this loot box issue is an area where some people are doing it well, and then some people are doing it in a predatory way. And if that continued, someone's going to step in and take action. And so the FTC is beginning to consider those sorts of actions. So I had this at the bottom of what I was going to ask, but let's just start here. How do you think this story bodes for the future of the government intervening on loot boxes? Do you think it's becoming a more likely possibility?
I don't know, man. I go back and forth on this because I think on the one hand, the government is far too uneducated on loot boxes to really make a big move on this. But then I remember that it's the government and that their education
when
level
has knowledge ever stopped them?
Yeah, their education level on a particular topic doesn't necessarily stop them from making decisions about it. I think that the video game industry has a big enough lobbying arm in DC that it's going to be really, really hard for them to legislate anything without rattling that cage to the point where there's maybe going to be some financial and political backlash for certain candidates within it. And so I don't know. I think it's an interesting argument that it's not just, hey, kids are being exposed to these gambling mechanics and they may grow older and, succumb to gambling addiction. Because that's a long tail study that we just don't have the time under our belts to make an assessment there. We don't know how these kids who've grown up playing mobile games are going to adapt to real gambling in their adult life. So I think this is an interesting angle to look at it, this whole idea of like people who have struggled with gambling addiction who have overcome it are, what did it say, twice as likely to slide back if they interact with these kind of mechanics in a game?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't have it pulled up right now.
And so I think when you get to that point, when it's like, this is having a real life impact on individuals who struggle with regulated gambling to the point where it will push them back. It may push them back into those real life regulated gambling things. Then I think at that point, like, the government may feel some pressure to step in more because there are direct studies showing this correlation. Not to mention just the fact that video games have, become a target for government rhetoric here in the last few weeks as well. And so I can just imagine this conversation getting conflated with that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of my thought too. These two things in conjunction. Like right now, games are a popular political target, and what might have hurt a candidate to go after 2 weeks ago uh, might actually earn them some points right now. And unfortunately, for most political candidates, they care more about what points they can earn than whether they're actually doing a good thing or not.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably too general, but
I think you'll be hard pressed. I think it'll be hard pressed to find many people who will disagree with that statement you just made.
Yeah. So I feel like it is just something that's looming more and more. The fact that the FTC is looking at it, and I'm honestly to a point where I'm not super opposed to something happening, but I'd rather just see, like we mentioned several weeks ago, you mentioned this idea several weeks ago, just see the ESRB like slap a warning on the cover that this game contains loot boxes, and maybe a little explanation of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe just put it in plain terms. This game contains gambling elements where real life money can be risked in exchange for the chance at a prize.
Yeah.
I think that's how parents need to hear it, because as I've heard you talk many times about parents and GameStops, even that is probably not direct enough.
I've been stepping back and thinking a little bit more about the conversation we had either last week or the week before when the ESA got together and said they're going to start requiring drop rates to be published. Or certain publishers were vowing to publicize their drop rates. I've been thinking about that a little more, and like we talked about it as if it's a good thing, and I think it is a good thing. But we also talked about how other forms of gambling require that. You know, you think about the lottery; they have to publish their chances, your chances of winning. Do you think that a move like that kind of legitimizes this conversation that we're having about, in the eyes of people who are not as familiar with loot boxes, that, oh, well, they're telling you your chances to win certain object, and so like it creates this mental correlation automatically between loot boxes and actual gambling. I'm saying actual gambling. That's not what I mean. I think loot boxes have, you know, connections to gambling, but you know, what is legally recognized as gambling today.
I'm sure it does. For me, I might be hesitant at first if I were just hearing about loot boxes. It might take me a while to piece together, oh, that's the same thing as gambling. And in fact, it did take me a while to think of it in those terms. But if you throw up the chances of winning and be like, oh, okay, this is like a sweepstakes or or a lottery ticket.
Yeah. Yeah, but and so I think when you get to that point, like I agree with this whole statement that you need to regulate yourself, police yourself before somebody else does, and that's a Jim Sterling argument with loot boxes as well from the Jimquisition, and I'm sure he's not the only person who said that in this argument either, but I think it's going to take more than just we're publishing drop rates to take the heat off. I think it may buy them some time, but what is the way that there are several regulations placed on, you know, casinos and the lottery and those sorts of things. Number one, there's an age restriction on how old you have to be in order to participate in those things. I think it's 18 to play the lottery, but then like to go to a casino in Vegas, I think you've got to be 21, right?
I'm not sure.
You know, there's the whole you have to publish you have to publicize your chances of winning. And then the second thing, and then another regulation is anytime you're doing something that's seen as gambling, is you have to also provide resources for how to reach out if you have problem gambling. And so I think if the ESA really wants to take the government pressure off, then they have to say every game that has loot box mechanics is going to automatically receive an M rating. And that's going to fuck over, you know, FIFA and Madden and these games that have annually had E ratings. But we're placing an age restriction on it. We're already asking publishers to make public the drop rates for the things that they win. And if you're going to include these games, then you have to provide an in-game disclaimer about how to reach out if you have a problem. Because, and the thing that is the smoking gun in the whole conversation to me is when you read about how publishers and developers talk about the whales for these games, and the fact that they know that they're designing this around finding those very obsessive individuals who are going to spend thousands of dollars on this game. That's the smoking gun to me. They're not living, these games aren't living and dying by the me and yous who go in and may occasionally drop a buck or two on something. They're living and dying by the people who are going in and spending thousands.
Yeah. Something you said I wanted to go back to, and I've lost it.
I'll say everything
the M
over
rating,
again.
The M rating. Like that may seem extreme and it may screw over some games, but here's the reality. If it is gambling, then we've already established as a society that is an activity for adults. And I think you're hard pressed to define it as anything other than gambling. And if that is the case, then kids don't need to be able to access it. Now, I understand parents will buy the games and there's no way to keep kids from doing it. And I imagine with online gambling, it's the same thing. Like, you got to prove you're old enough, but like, some people are slipping through. I have no doubt. Right.
Well, dude, we were at that gas station a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
That, like, we saw an old woman buying her daughter or granddaughter lottery tickets, who was like, what, maybe a couple years older than your daughter? Like, she was what, 7, 8 years old? Like, it happens. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't police it.
Yeah, make it harder. So yeah, I guess the next thing I kind of want to talk about is, and I feel like I'm shifting in my thought on this, but is this mechanic of loot boxes inherently bad? If it's not, when does it become predatory? And so I'm lumping a bunch of stuff in together. Is it inherently bad? And the reason I'm asking that is now in light of the fact that, this is affecting gambling addicts. Like, should gambling addicts just be avoiding these games at all costs? Is the mechanic too risky for people and children altogether? Or is there a point when it becomes particularly, okay, this is now a bad mechanic?
The word inherently here is a little tough to navigate, just because in a vacuum, I think absolutely there are ways you can do these mechanics to where it adds to the fun of the experience and it's not, and it's in and of itself predatory. But that's not why these mechanics are in any game. Like, that's not why any of them exist. They all exist to take advantage of a particular segment of the audience who's willing to spend that amount of money. And especially on the mobile side of games, it is egregiously geared towards children who are playing these games to spend that money. And the thing that makes gambling so bad is not the gambling of it in and of itself. Nobody is saying that going to a slot machine and pulling down the lever is bad. It is the financial ruin that it can lead to. It is the real life financial consequences that it can lead to. It is the real life relationship consequences that it can lead to. And there are stories that have been published about people who get addicted to these to these mechanics in games and spend outrageous amounts of money on it. There are stories about kids who run up credit card bills for their parents because they're just given like the liberty to go in and buy as much as they want. And it's impacting real people in real financial ways and in real relational ways. And that's why gambling is regulated. And so why should loot boxes not be regulated by somebody? Again, I don't want Congress voting on this thing, but somebody needs to step in and lay the guardrails down.
Yeah. Yeah, right now the only people deciding how far is too far are the people trying to get the advantage.
Exactly.
And that's led me to, like, there was a time where I was like, no, it's not bad, but there are some risks. And I guess I'm just getting to where without somebody policing this, the risks are outweighing the benefits of the financing of the ongoing game. Like, something needs to happen to keep kids from stepping into this addiction, and to with the addicts, I think about the warning label aspect. It is entirely possible that you could buy a game and not realize you're getting into a loot box situation until you're in it. And they need more of a heads up than that.
Especially as more and more companies take established franchises that have been long known and then inject these into it. When you think you're just, I'm going to download a SimCity game because I remember playing SimCity on my PC back in the day. Oh shit, I've got to pay for additional playtime or whatever on this mobile game.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the last thing I kind of want to get into is, we've established we need to be able to monetize games if we want them to be long-term games that last for a while. We don't want to pay for DLC anymore as gamers. We don't want to pay more than $60 a game as gamers, but we want more content, and we don't like that has to be paid for. And so, is there? And we've talked about this before, but I just want to cover it again because I feel like we've been thinking about it a lot, and maybe we've got some more ideas. But is there a way to do that without loot boxes? Is there a solid established way to have ongoing monetization of games so that developers can get paid for their work and we can continue to get products from the people that we enjoy playing their games?
So the rub is this. There have been obviously other ongoing monetization models that we've seen in the gaming industry, starting with things like season passes and map packs and those sorts of things. The balance that publishers and developers are having to strike is, we need to have content that people are willing to pay for post-launch, but not content that splits them away from the player base that is unwilling to pay additional money for the things that are going to come out. And so that's the problem we're running into. And so you look at a game like Overwatch, which has a loot box mechanic, and it's all cosmetics only, and is probably one of the more reasonable loot box mechanics at the end of the day compared to a lot of other games. But you dropped $60, 3 years ago now, and you've gotten every single character, every single map, every single new game mode, every single event for completely free without having to pay a dime for it. And the reason for that is because they realize, like, if we're going to charge people for Paris, the map Paris, that's going to split our player base, because there are going to be a group of people who aren't willing to pay for it, so can't be dropped into those queues, and queue times are going to get longer, quality games are going to get worse, and so they have to strike that balance. So I don't think we can go back to the whole season pass idea. There are some games that do that effectively. You think about like Rainbow Six Siege, Destiny, but even those games have microtransactions within them, but not necessarily loot boxes. So the Circle Hunter says Paris is garbage. I don't want it anyway. A lot of people would agree with you there. Well, it's a 2CP, and a lot of people would agree that they just want all of those out.
I would like a refund on my Paris map, please.
Just email Jeff. He'll get right on that for you. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to go back to that. I think we're going to move more towards like what Epic does with Fortnite, where yes, they have loot boxes, but you can see what's in the loot box before you buy it. And so, I mean, how much of a loot box mechanic really is that? But but it keeps you engaged because, hey, you may not want this thing that's in this loot box now, but that loot box refreshes in 2 hours, so come back or whatever. So more of that, and more of just like, hey, we're gonna charge you for a skin, and you just get what you pay for. I think those are the two main things we're gonna see moving forward.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of the charge for skin, you get what you pay for kind of idea. The two things that stand out to me as really good ways to monetize are, I think that the season pass and the way that Apex and Fortnite do it, where you can progress and it's purely cosmetic without the pass, or you buy the battle pass or whatever, and you've got more stuff you can unlock. I think that's a decent way to do it. I haven't played League in years, but League used to be set up in such a way that there was a rotating selection of characters anyone could play, but you had to like buy the character if you wanted to be able to play them all the time. Is that still?
Yeah.
Like, I think Overwatch could do something like that, and maybe not because it's established something else from the get-go, but especially the way people decide on their main and just play their main anyway.
Yeah.
I think that Overwatch could benefit from that, and with me, sooner or later, I would have wound up buying most of their characters just because I have the deepest character pool ever in
Yeah.
Overwatch. uh, so those are things, but there are also things that have been done, which leads me to believe that the whales they're going after with the loot boxes have just been so profitable
Oh yeah.
that nothing else is going to compare.
Oh yeah. Circle Hunter brings up an interesting point in the chat. He says, I do not believe that the loot box system as a concept is, for lack of a better term, inherently bad. But what we see now is a lack of developers regulating it with the intention of taking advantage of people. If there were limits on how often one could make an in-game transaction, or if there was a cap on per-day spending, that would at least be a step in the right direction, in my opinion. I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I think I don't think it'll ever happen. But
Yeah.
you think about something like alcohol, and you go to a bar. I bet a bar would be like a bar, if you're looking at it from a purely financial standpoint, a bar would love to just have an alcoholic in there who they can just serve and serve and serve and serve. But there are limits, and they're not necessarily hard and defined. But in order to maintain your ABC license as like a liquor distributor, you can't overserve the people who have these problems. And so if somebody is clearly has a problem with this on that given night, then you have the responsibility to cut them off. If you're working at a grocery store and somebody who's clearly drunk comes through trying to buy alcohol, you have a responsibility to cut them off at that point. And so
and if they go on and do something and hurt themselves or someone else after you've sold them alcohol when they were clearly past the limit, you can be held responsible for that.
Yeah. And so I don't know. Do I think something like that would ever happen? No. But do I think that there is precedent for something like that? I think absolutely. And so yeah, no, I like that point.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Because in these digital marketplaces, you just don't have somebody. You don't have the guy standing at the counter being able to say, "Sir, you've had enough."
Yeah.
And to put an automated one in would be better than nothing, but not beneficial to the company.
Yeah.
And what matters more, Luke? What matters more?
I don't think my answer matters.
Yeah, that's all I got really. I felt like it was worth talking about again because the FTC is obviously taking this seriously. They'd spend a whole day looking at this one issue, and I expect things are going to change soon. And I hope companies get ahead of it and put limits on themselves that make sense. And I really hope we find a better mechanic that is beneficial to companies, but also not predatory to people who have addiction issues. But I know that is a hard problem to solve.
Yeah. And maybe mutually exclusive.
Yeah.